What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12+ hour days 6 days a week and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking it. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is fricked up and the department manager my name was a total moron and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know it about my industry and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to itch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only CEO could fire him. I said and my name, right? He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an AOLA. I had a boss whose #1 hiring philosophy was we can teach people work skills, but we can't teach them what their parents should have taught them. Been a guiding principle for me when hiring ever since. I wonder what that idiot is doing now. I hope for his sake he learned some humility, but you really never know. I saw him a few years ago managing a Firestone. I didn't stop to say hi. As my previous foreman would say, I can fix dumb, but I can't fix stupid. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I check their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1-2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund, because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threaten to never use the service again. Typical stuff that they always say. Eventually the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen and that person denies the refund. The next day she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to her supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. The customer tries to argue with me, threaten to never use the service again. So we agree. Great. I've managed service industry for years, and the number of people who make that threat having never spent a penny is baffling, especially this year. I swear it's once a week right now that after I tell somebody to leave and not return, they've threatened not to return. I've had to have police remove people and they'll scream about how they'll never return on their way out. Are the police dragging you out not enough of a sign that that's exactly what I want? What about the criminal trespassing notice you got? Some people just cannot fathom that they're not wanted everywhere by everyone. Some dudes would walk in for the first time and loudly declare I'm finally here. Like they just got back from liberating France and it was just a big ol' red flag that declared I will demand special treatment the entire time I'm here. I taught my 6th grade students about democratic processes, and we ran a simulation. Without fail, every one of my classes tried to impeach me. Should have played monarchy instead. As long as you don't have a guillotine in your class. Did your parents sign the permission slip for the execution? The paper cutter in the back of the room is pretty much a guillotine. Had an old boss who was a complete and total bastard. He was actually my boss's boss. and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss, but he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him and he just starts unloading, cursing, name calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the frick I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and I'll gladly take that money. If I'm busy being yelled at, I'm not busy with anything else. Seemed to work. This is my next big power move at work. I am working from home, so the next time my boss starts screaming at me I'm just going to use my best teacher voice to say, when you can match my tone, I will be happy to have this conversation with you, and then I will hang up the call. I used to get a ton of angry customers at a car dealership service department I worked in. I started using this sentence. I'm a person, you're a person, let's talk like people. Simple, but effective. Worked 99% of the time. I have used right now. There are two people that care about your issue and you are yelling at one of them. Works surprisingly well. Brother, you are cool as ice. I am taking notes and slow clapping it out. I wasn't that cool back then. This was my first big job running a cooling plant and I was a nervous wreck. Chain smoking through every shift and hating whenever this guy would rattle me. I think I was as surprised as he was when I hung up and stood my ground, lol. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching his consultants. Which, in and of itself, is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to our office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the frick he was doing here. He started in on me again and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. I did the old hand on his back, point to the door universal symbol for leave, or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. I've got a similar story. Many years ago, we fired a salesperson. She was a compulsive liar and unethical as hell. She was also living under the delusion that the place would fall apart without her, and that we'd be begging her to come back in a couple of weeks. So it didn't sit too well with her when we hired her replacement. His first day on the job, she calls him up to cuss him out for stealing her job. Later that day, she called corporate. I understand their conversation went like this. "Huh? That bastard's trying to steal my clients. He's going around town telling people he replaced me." Corporate. "He did replace you. Harass him again or any other employees and we're calling the cops." That finally convinced her that we weren't going to be begging her to come back. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. Brilliant. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mum struggled to make ends meet and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy as part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. Guess revenge is a dish best served on the side of the house. So, my grandpa was a piece of work. Abusive, alcoholic, criminal, endlessly cheated on my grandma. My dad was the eldest of 7. He started working before and after school at like age 8. If my dad didn't hide the money, my grandpa would take and spend it on booze, gambling and other women. Anyway, when my dad was in high school, he took what learned from shop class and odd jobs and built 2 bedrooms and enlarged the kitchen of their ramshackle house. He was 17 years old and he did it during the hour or 2 he had between 2 jobs and school. Took him almost a year. The day he was done, my grandpa rolls up with another woman and the 4 kids they have together and tries to move them in. My spineless grandmother was going to let it happen until my dad said, "I will burn this motherfricker down before I'll let you move another family in here." That night, my grandpa came back and burned the house down himself. Fortunately, my father had gone and paid an insurance salesman $1 a week to insure the house. This time, they rebuilt with cinder block and a tin roof. A co-worker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas and he was able to upgrade to a first class seat. We had this itch sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant Mac mansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first class seat as she is making her way to coach and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first class cabin and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class, and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally he tells her she has to go back to her seat, or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first class cabin. This one just makes me sad. People who really internalize that a corporate ladder has any relation to people's worth are only hurting themselves in the end. Wait until you meet military wives.